the exercise of authority or power by the government over individuals. In fact, your history is replete with lot of examples, events wherein human beings are treated worse than that of animals. In fact, I often repeat this example. In fact, in 1937, Hitler, ordered in the meeting itself 67 members of the Nazi party who opposed war propaganda be killed. And they were killed in the meeting itself. And the next day, Hitler declares that he was acting as Chief Justice of German people. And it was not killings, but judicial executions. So then how to protect individuals against these onslaughts? In fact, second example, during debate on Bengal famine in Parliament, Churchill himself made a remark that somebody protested that millions of people are dying in Bengal. Churchill said, we are at war with Germany, we can't look into the small things that are going on. Some people dying in some corner of the colony. So this is recorded in Amartya Sen's famine studies. So then who should protect the interests of individuals against social, political, economic onslaught? The farmer's suicide, in fact, why I chose this right to livelihood. So globalization, how it affects individuals' right to livelihood. So why farmers are deprived of their livelihood? In fact, normally we concede that rights are protected against state action. So then in fact now at one point of time, of course, it is believed that these misfortunes, etc., are inevitable consequences of human life. In fact, Western society where people are punished, the poor, if they rebel against the government and assert that they should be provided with certain facilities, they were punished because there was a belief that the hunger, famine, calamities are inevitable consequences of life, and one has to bear with it. So then another notion is that survival is an individual aspect and society has nothing to do with this. It is individual duty to work. In fact, the very concept of right emerged after Second World War out of what is called as a sort of protest against duties or karma. In fact, all moral theories, in fact, society rests on minimum consensus on moral standards. So then morality should be based on duty. In fact, we often, even the Gandhi has said that, every right deserved and preserved should flow from duty well done. So then the societal morality was earlier based on the concept of duties. Individuals have duties to perform. So then from these duties the rights may flow, may not flow always. But when the society, now the question is, when the society try to impose duties which an individual cannot perform, or if the duties are of such a nature that the performance may affect legitimate interests of individuals, what individuals should do? In fact, Hitler, once through a law, compelled the women workers to work in bakeries during Second World War for 16 hours. Otherwise, a penalty of so many. Can a woman with weak health, can she perform a duty of that time? So that is why the rights came to the forefront, so that it is a protection against social onslaught. In fact, rights are also controversial because it is again an ethical or moral concept involving all sorts of relativistic elements. So then, in fact, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights brought the concept of right to the forefront. Until then, even now also many people argue that the duties are the instrument through which human conduct in an organized society is regulated. So then, in fact, at one point of time, duties are imposed in the name of God. Thereafter, it was imposed in the name of political institutions, society, social contract theories, etc. But then, if the duties which cannot be performed or those are incapable of being performed are imposed in the name of what is called as social welfare or community welfare. This is the problem. So that is why sometimes right is defined as a protection against utilitarian concept of welfare. In fact, that some individuals will be victim of political process because of, in fact, their victimization sometimes justified on utilitarian grounds. That is why Dworkin tried to define right as a trump over utility. In fact, that Hitler imposed all sorts of duties. In fact, he authorized the killing and tried to get the support of people on the ground that if you work 18 hours a day, tomorrow you will become superior citizens of the world. I will take you to heaven, just like Garibi Hatao, Indira Gandhi. So that India is Indira, Indira is India. So in the name of India, Indira, all opposition leaders must be jailed. Emergency must be imposed. Who are the sufferers? So the political opponents. In a democracy, dissent is recognized. So there is no scope for dissent. So then who should protect the interests of those who oppose legitimately certain policies of the government? So that is why the rights. So that in the name of, in fact, at one point of time, Bradley, an idealist, has said, organism or the society is supreme, and this society has the right to dispose of any individuals in any manner it likes. So the problem is that public interest may be supreme. But somebody, some institution on behalf of the community acts, and that has to be regulated. So that is why the concept of rights. In fact, that is why, that from the time of, since the time of Magna Carta, so the individuals have asserted that they have certain rights against the society, government. First right claimed was, no one shall be detained without the judgment of a court of law. That is how we got all these fundamental rights in the Constitution. But at crucial circumstances, the fundamental rights may fail to protect the legitimate interests of individuals. because it depends upon the constitution. For example, you know that, so that any amendment to Article 21, so the Supreme Court, it has been argued even in EDM Jabalpur versus Shukran Shukla that the Mirande, during emergency, because Article 21 is suspended, no one has right to life. Anybody can be detained. So the Justice Khanna asked that. So that while going to court, if I am detained, is there any remedy? No remedy. Mirande says, thereafter he shifts. And Supreme Court approves. So that is why human rights are superior to the constitutional rights. It, in fact, do not depend upon the constitution. So it is, human rights consists of certain universal moral ethical standards which forms the basis for evaluation of individual, social, political, economic activities and conduct, individual conduct, the institutional behavior, the law, everything is now subject to evaluation in terms of human rights. So then we come to, in fact, you know that human rights again controversial in the sense that, so communists try to object human rights on the ground that it is highly egoistic, and then, so sometimes in fact, you know that human rights content, in its details, it varies. So it has no definite content as such, and that is why, in fact, you know that in international politics, this controversy concerning the civil and political rights on the one hand and economic and social rights on the other. So our right to livelihood forums, in fact, the one among several socio-economic and cultural rights. In fact, for long, these rights are not recognized as human rights because the right to livelihood, right to is an aspect of individual responsibility, but in modern circumstances, so the many people may become victims of the vagaries of the economic, political, social processes. That is why, in fact, it is many people sometimes, you know, that, so that is why it is Nandigram problem. The problem is that of livelihood. So that, in fact, normally since time immemorial we have recognized, in fact, you know, that agriculture, trade or business, so the occupation or profession, so that as the means of livelihood. So then, in fact, this agriculture, so if they part with agricultural land, so they lose their livelihood. That is why the protest. So that, in fact, the reaction was that if SEZs are established by acquiring compulsorily agricultural land, they may lose their livelihood. In fact, in many circumstances, we find the people begging with some carts. So that due to flood in North India, so we are begging in South Canada. So they will have one, of course, veracity we don't know, but in many cases, so that due to natural calamities and due to the operation of socio-economic political system, many circumstances, so the individuals were deprived of their basic necessities. In fact, earlier, so that, for example, we have that refugee problem. So that for that, you know, that refugee stamps were made to feed them. So then they have, in fact, you know, that, so the civil and political rights recognized only negative rights that can be easily protected, whereas the economic and social rights in the Indian context, forming part of directive principles of state policy, so that requires some positive state action. So then these rights cannot be enforced in the same manner in which the negative civil and political rights can be enforced, because if a person is illegally detained, the court can easily order for release. But if a person is starving, so the food has to be provided. Who should provide the food? Under what scheme it should be provided? Where is the money for food? All those provisions have to be made. That is why, in fact, you know that. But everyone, so that may not claim this right. That is why some people like Cranston and others, so there is controversy whether economic and social rights should be recognized as human rights. One of the
Person, co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen. The theme of my paper is Human Rights Concerns of Public Interest Litigation. It's enforcement of human rights through public interest litigation, we can say. See, human rights are simply what every human being owes to every other human being, and as such they represent universal moral obligations. And our own Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993 defines the human rights to mean rights relating to life, liberty, equality, and dignity, guaranteed by the Constitution or embodied in the international covenants and enforceable by the courts in India. Now, the basic element of human rights is universal, and it consists of freedom, equality, and liberty. And this basic element, the core content of human rights, is evidenced in the Charter of the United Nations, which lays a special stress for the fundamental human rights. And the Charter, with many other declarations, resolutions, covenants, and conventions, forms the regime of human rights. And India is a member, original member of the United Nations, and it is, apart from being a member, party to the two international covenants of 1966, is also party to many other human rights conventions or human rights instruments, international human rights instruments. Now, on the onset of the democratic movement and the emergence of the idea of human rights in all over the world, this led to the trend of guaranteeing the human rights in the basic laws, the constitutions. And soon it was witnessed that mere incorporation of these rights is not sufficient, because many states in the world face the problem of violation of human rights in one form or the other. India is no exception to this. Statistically speaking, the Supreme Court or a High Court in the country delivers at least one judgment every day touching upon the violation of human rights. And this performance of the court matches the rise in the number of violations of human rights. So whenever there is any discussion on the human rights in the country, the active role played by the judiciary, the courts, in the enforcement of the rights, in the enlarging the scope of the rights, etc., by its active role cannot be forgotten. Now, Article 51 of the Constitution says, directs the state to make endeavor to foster respect for international law and treaty obligations. And these human rights instruments form part of the international law. And international law as such is not part of the municipal law here. It's not part of Indian law unless it is specifically incorporated by parliamentary legislation. So the enforcement or application of human rights within the national jurisdiction is dependent upon specific legislation. Once it is done, so if it is done, there is no difficulty for the courts to enforce these human rights. But the question is, how far this is made? Now, any theme of the expression of human rights is to convert this art of literary expression of human rights into reality. So what is necessary is the right, the scope and meaning of the right is to be specified. The correlative duty, the content of the correlative duty is also to be specified. The limitations of such right are also to be spelled out. And this may be done by the framers of the Constitution or by ordinary lawmaking or by the judicial activism, by the judicial lawmaking we say. And in India we have these basic rights to life, liberty and equality guaranteed by the Constitution, and they are very well protected by the remedies available or ensured under the Constitution. For that, the first generation human rights, the civil and political rights, we see that they find place in the part 3 of the Constitution. The second generation economic and social rights are also placed in the fourth part 4 of the Constitution, though not justiciable, it is nevertheless fundamental in the governance of the state. The rest, the third generation collective rights, the solidarity rights, they are also recognized in India by the judicial lawmaking. So thereby, the basic human rights are given the constitutional status. Now, in this background, what we find is the constitutional commitment of providing for the far-reaching human rights, the fundamental freedoms to the citizens, is strengthened, further strengthened by the active role played by the dynamic, vivacious judiciary, with Supreme Court at its apex. And what we find here is the courts, the higher courts in India, by actively interpreting, liberally interpreting the human rights, the existing rights, including the unenumerated human rights, have given new vista for the human rights movement in India by liberally interpreting these existing rights. And further, under the Constitution, as Article 141 says, the task of interpretation of the constitutional provision is that of the Supreme Court. And when Supreme Court is interpreting these constitutional provisions relating to rights, we see it has so interpreted the constitutional provisions relating to rights to read into the right, existing rights, so many other rights which were not made directly enforceable, other human rights not made directly enforceable in the municipal sphere. Here, we say the independent judiciary is the live wire of any judicial system. And it is an essential institution to maintain the equilibrium between the liberty of the individual and the power of the state. And in doing this, we find the Supreme Court, under the power conferred on it or the jurisdiction given under the provisions of the Constitution, specifically I refer to 142 clause 1, wherein the Supreme Court may pass such decree or make such order as is necessary for doing complete justice in any cause or matter pending before it. So under the power conferred on the courts, the Supreme Court under Article 32 and 142, and the High Courts under 226, they have forged new tools and devised new strategies and liberally interpreted the provisions of the Constitution relating to human rights. But the protection and promotion of the human rights is the greatest task before the state. And if the state fails in this task, the question is how to make the people enjoy their basic human rights. And perhaps public interest litigation is a partial answer to this. In the public interest litigation, the concept and the ideology is fashioned by the Supreme Court, followed by the High Courts. It is initiated by some judges of the Supreme Court. Its ideology, content, all are fashioned by the judges themselves. So it is said public interest litigation in India is judge-made and judge-led, and which has made law and justice more accessible to the people, to the generality of the public here. So it is an effective instrument in rendering justice within the existing framework of Indian legal system. So a judiciary that consists both courage and conviction can alone protect the cause of human rights. As Justice Bhagwati says in his views, The task of a judge in human rights area is active rather than differential, creative rather than mechanical, evolutionary rather than status quoist, human rather than formalist. And our judges in the Supreme Court, specifically in relation to matters with public interest litigations, dealing with the public interest proceedings, have been all this. The highest judiciary has allowed the public-spirited persons or groups to come forward for the protection of the human rights of the poor and ignorant, and due to this, millions of people's violations of human rights were brought before the court. Justice Krishna Iyer calls this as a product of creative judicial engineering, an innovation of the judiciary, an institutional innovation